My name is Sophia Harper, and I'm 24 years old. Right now, I'm standing in my childhood kitchen, staring at the torn pieces of what used to be my Harvard Law School acceptance letter scattered across the linoleum floor. My father Richard just finished shredding it while screaming that girls don't need degrees, that I'm wasting the family's money on foolish dreams. But what he doesn't see is my grandfather William standing in the doorway behind him, watching everything with eyes that have turned cold as winter steel. Grandpa's voice cuts through the silence like a blade when he whispers, "Richard, you're going to regret this decision for the rest of your miserable life." Before we dive into this story of betrayal and ultimate justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe what my grandfather did next to make my father pay for destroying my dreams. This story will show you that sometimes the most unexpected allies emerge when family turns against you. Let me take you back to understand how we reached this devastating moment. I had spent my entire life being the perfect daughter, the one who brought home straight A's while my brother Michael barely scraped by with C's. I was valedictorian of my high school class with a perfect SAT score of 1600, and I had earned a full scholarship to Harvard Law School through sheer determination and countless hours of study. This wasn't just any acceptance letter my father destroyed, it was the culmination of everything I had worked for since I was old enough to dream. My father Richard Harper had always been a traditional man with very specific ideas about a woman's place in the world. He believed daughters should learn to cook, clean, and find good husbands who could provide for them. Education beyond high school was, in his mind, a complete waste of time and money for females. He had spent years telling me that law school was for men, that I should focus on finding a nice boy from church and settling down to raise children. Every academic achievement I earned was met with dismissive comments about how I was getting too big for my britches or becoming too independent for my own good. Meanwhile, my brother Michael had been handed everything on a silver platter despite showing no ambition or talent for anything meaningful. When his grades were terrible, Dad made excuses and blamed the teachers. When Michael crashed 3 different cars, Dad bought him new ones without consequence. When my brother's business ventures failed spectacularly, costing the family thousands of dollars, Dad called it learning experiences and continued funding his next harebrained scheme. The double standard was so obvious that even our neighbors noticed how differently we were treated. My mother Linda was perhaps the most disappointing part of this whole dynamic. She had once dreamed of becoming a nurse before she married my father, but somewhere along the way, she had given up her own ambitions and decided that meant all women should do the same. Instead of supporting my academic goals, she actively undermined them by scheduling family obligations during my study time and guilt-tripping me about neglecting household duties. She would often say things like, "Sophia thinks she's too good for us now," whenever I spent time on homework instead of cooking dinner or doing laundry for the family. But my grandfather William Harper was different from the rest of them in ways that would soon become crucially important. Grandpa had built a successful construction company from absolutely nothing, starting with a single hammer and a borrowed truck when he was just 18 years old. By the time I was born, he owned multiple properties throughout the state and employed over 200 people in his various business ventures. What my father never understood was that Grandpa's success came from recognizing talent and potential wherever he found it, regardless of gender or background. He had always been secretly proud of my academic achievements, even when he couldn't express it openly due to family pressure. The financial dynamics in our household were more complicated than they appeared on the surface. My father managed the distributions from Grandpa's family trust, which meant he controlled how much money each family member received and when they received it. This position gave him enormous power over everyone's lives, and he used it ruthlessly to maintain control. He had convinced my mother that questioning his financial decisions would jeopardize the family's security, and he kept Michael dependent by threatening to cut off his allowance whenever he showed any signs of independence. I had always assumed that my college fund was safely tucked away somewhere, earning interest and waiting for the day I would need it for tuition and expenses. What I didn't know was that my father had been using his position as trustee to systematically steal money from the family accounts, including the funds that were specifically designated for my education. He had developed a serious gambling problem over the past few years, and he had been covering his losses by dipping into trust fund money that wasn't legally his to touch. Every time I brought home another academic award or scholarship opportunity, he saw it as a threat to his carefully constructed web of financial deception. If I actually went to college and started asking questions about my education fund, his crimes would be exposed for everyone to see. The morning when my Harvard acceptance letter arrived should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the catalyst for a family war that would destroy everything we thought we knew about each other. The confrontation that would change my life forever began when I walked into the kitchen that Tuesday morning to find my father sitting at the table with my opened mail in his hands. The thick envelope from Harvard Law School was unmistakable, and I could see from his expression that he had already read the contents. My heart was racing with excitement because I knew what that envelope meant, but the look on his face told me that my joy was about to be crushed in the most brutal way possible. "Sophia, sit down," he commanded in a voice that made my stomach drop. "We need to have a serious conversation about your future and your ridiculous expectations." I remained standing because something in his tone warned me that sitting would put me in a position of weakness I couldn't afford. That's when he held up my acceptance letter and began reading it aloud in a mocking voice, emphasizing every word about my full scholarship and academic achievements as if they were personal insults to his authority as head of the household. "This ends now," he declared, and before I could react, he began tearing the letter into small pieces while screaming about how girls don't need degrees and how I was being selfish and ungrateful. "You think you're better than your mother? You think you're too good for this family? I've spent enough money on your foolish dreams, and it stops today." Each word hit me like a physical blow as I watched years of hard work being literally shredded before my eyes. But the destruction of my Harvard letter was only the beginning of his rampage. He stormed into my bedroom and returned with every other college acceptance letter I had received, along with my academic awards and certificates from high school. One by one, he fed them into the fireplace while my mother stood by watching without saying a word to stop him. My acceptance to Stanford, my scholarship offers from Duke and Georgetown, my National Merit Scholar Certificate, my debate team trophies, everything that represented my academic achievements went up in flames while he lectured me about learning my place in the world. That's when my brother Michael decided to join in the humiliation. He started laughing and calling me uppity and ungrateful, saying that I had always thought I was too good for the rest of the family. "Maybe now you'll come back down to earth and stop acting like you're some kind of genius," he sneered while helping Dad destroy my belongings. "Real women don't need law degrees to be happy. Look at Mom, she's perfectly content taking care of her family instead of chasing impossible dreams." The worst part was when my mother finally spoke up, but not to defend me. Instead, she looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Your father is right, Sophia. You've been getting too big for your britches, and it's time you learned what really matters in life. You should be focusing on finding a good husband and learning to be a proper wife and mother, not filling your head with ideas about careers and independence. This family has given you everything, and this is how you repay us." I felt completely alone in that moment, surrounded by people who were supposed to love and support me but who were instead systematically destroying every dream I had ever dared to have. The scholarship deadline was only 2 weeks away, and without my acceptance letter and the required documentation, I would lose my opportunity to attend Harvard forever. They knew exactly what they were doing when they chose to destroy everything on that specific day. That's when my grandfather appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel. He had been visiting to discuss some business matters with my father, but instead he witnessed the complete annihilation of his granddaughter's future. The expression on his face was unlike anything I had ever seen before, a mixture of rage and disappointment that made the entire room fall silent. He didn't say much in that moment, just quietly surveyed the destruction and made his promise about my father's future regrets. Within hours of the confrontation, my father had announced his first punishment for my selfish ambitions. I would be working full-time at the family's struggling diner downtown, serving coffee and cleaning tables instead of preparing for college. He made it clear that this wasn't temporary employment to teach me work ethic. This was my new permanent reality. "Maybe washing dishes and dealing with demanding customers will teach you the value of hard work and knock some sense into that stubborn head of yours," he declared while my mother nodded in agreement. But the public humiliation was even worse than the private punishment. My father began spreading lies throughout our small town, telling anyone who would listen that I had been rejected from college due to poor character and behavioral problems. He claimed that my teachers had described me as disrespectful and untrustworthy, and that my academic achievements were the result of cheating and manipulation rather than genuine ability. Within days, people who had known me my entire life were looking at me with suspicion and disappointment, believing that everything they thought they knew about me had been a carefully constructed lie. The isolation was complete and devastating. Friends stopped calling because their parents didn't want them associating with someone who apparently had such serious character flaws. Teachers who had once praised my work began treating me with cold professionalism, unwilling to risk their reputations by supporting someone who was supposedly dishonest and manipulative. Even the guidance counselor who had helped me navigate the college application process refused to return my calls, probably believing that any assistance would be wasted on someone who had already proven herself to be unworthy of higher education. What none of them knew was that my grandfather had been quietly documenting everything that happened that day, and he was already beginning to formulate a plan for justice that would make my father wish he had never been born. While I was struggling through my first week of forced labor at the diner, serving coffee to customers who whispered about my supposed character flaws, my grandfather William was conducting a thorough investigation into our family's finances that would soon expose secrets my father thought he had buried forever. Grandpa had built his business empire by paying attention to details that other people missed, and something about my father's violent reaction to my college acceptance didn't sit right with him. A man doesn't destroy his daughter's future over ideological differences alone. There had to be something else driving such extreme behavior. His first stop was his accountant's office, where he requested a complete audit of every account connected to the family trust fund. What he discovered there made his blood run cold with rage. Over the past 3 years, my father had systematically embezzled nearly $200,000 from various family accounts, including the education fund that had been specifically established for my college expenses. The money had been transferred in small amounts to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but when viewed together, the pattern of theft was undeniable and devastating. The gambling addiction that my father thought he had successfully hidden was exposed in painful detail through bank records and credit card statements. Every weekend trip to Atlantic City that he claimed was for business meetings with construction contractors was actually cover for marathon poker sessions and slot machine binges. The emergency repairs for various rental properties were actually cash advances to cover gambling debts that were spiraling completely out of control. Even worse, he had been using my academic achievements to reassure creditors that his gambling debts would soon be paid off through reduced college expenses. But the investigation revealed an even more shocking betrayal when Grandpa discovered that my brother Michael had been actively helping with the financial deception. Michael's supposed business ventures. The food truck that failed after 3 months, the online clothing store that never sold a single item, the house-flipping partnership that ended in foreclosure, were all elaborate money laundering schemes designed to make the stolen funds appear legitimate. My brother hadn't failed at these businesses, he had never intended them to succeed in the first place. The paper trail showed that Michael had received nearly $50,000 in business loans from my college fund, money that immediately disappeared into luxury purchases and expensive vacations that he had somehow managed to keep secret from the rest of the family. While I was working multiple part-time jobs throughout high school to help with household expenses, my brother was spending my education money on designer clothes, expensive electronics, and weekend trips to Miami with his friends. Perhaps most heartbreaking of all was the discovery that my mother had known about the theft for more than a year. Bank statements showed that she had signed withdrawal slips and transfer documents, and email records revealed conversations where she expressed concern about the missing money but ultimately chose to remain silent rather than confront her husband about his criminal behavior. She had watched me work myself to exhaustion pursuing academic excellence while knowing that my college fund had already been stolen and gambled away. My grandfather's attorney confirmed what he already suspected. My father's position as trustee had been systematically abused, and the theft constituted multiple felonies that could result in significant prison time. The family trust had been established with specific legal protections to prevent exactly this type of financial abuse, and every dollar that had been stolen was meticulously documented in ways that would be impossible to deny or explain away in court. While this investigation was taking place, my father escalated his attacks on my independence and self-worth. He had contacted the local law firm where I had been offered a part-time position assisting with research and filing, and he convinced them to withdraw their job offer by claiming that I was unreliable and had a history of stealing from previous employers. "No daughter of mine is going to work with lawyers," he declared when I confronted him about the sabotage. "Those people are parasites who make money by destroying families, and I won't have you becoming one of them." The isolation campaign continued as my father reached out to extended family members and longtime friends, spreading his lies about my character and academic failures. Aunts and uncles who had always been proud of my achievements suddenly became distant and critical, believing that I had somehow deceived them about my abilities and accomplishments. Cousins who had looked up to me as a role model began treating me with suspicion and disappointment, convinced that everything they had admired about me was based on elaborate lies and manipulation. Even more devastating was the discovery that my father had contacted Harvard directly and attempted to convince them to revoke my acceptance by claiming that my application contained false information about my family's financial situation. Only the intervention of my high school guidance counselor, who still believed in my character despite the rumors, prevented the university from taking his accusations seriously. But the damage to my confidence and sense of security was already done. I began to question whether I was truly worthy of the opportunities one had worked so hard to earn. My grandfather's investigation also revealed the true extent of my father's financial crimes against other family members. He had been stealing from my cousin's trust funds, my grandmother's estate, and even the pension funds of employees at the construction company. The web of deception was so extensive that it would take months to fully unravel all the ways he had betrayed people who trusted him with their financial security and family legacy. But what my father didn't realize was that every day he spent humiliating me and destroying my future was another day my grandfather spent building an ironclad case for complete financial and legal destruction. The old man's patience was legendary in business circles, but when he finally struck, his enemies never saw it coming until it was far too late to defend themselves. The first sign that my grandfather's patience had reached its limit came on a seemingly ordinary Thursday morning when my father tried to access the family trust account to make his usual monthly withdrawal and discovered that his access had been completely frozen. The bank manager explained that the account owner had revoked all trustee privileges pending a complete financial audit, but my father didn't immediately understand the full implications of what was happening to his carefully constructed world of deception and control. Within hours of discovering the frozen accounts, my father received a certified letter from Grandpa's attorneys informing him that his position as trustee had been permanently terminated due to evidence of financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. The letter also demanded immediate repayment of all misappropriated funds, along with detailed documentation of every transaction he had made over the past 5 years. The legal language was cold and precise, making it clear that this wasn't a family dispute that could be resolved through apologies and promises to do better. But the real shock came when my father discovered that he had never actually owned any of the assets he thought belonged to him. The house we had lived in for my entire life was titled in my grandfather's name, as were the cars in our driveway, the furniture in our rooms, and even the diner where I had been forced to work as punishment for my academic ambitions. Everything my father had used to establish his authority and control over our family was actually property that could be taken away at any moment by the man whose trust he had systematically violated for years. My brother Michael's world began crumbling even faster than my father's when the luxury cars he had purchased with stolen education funds were repossessed by court order. The BMW convertible he had been driving to impress girls at the community college, the motorcycle he used for weekend rides with his friends, and even the expensive gaming setup in his bedroom, all of it disappeared overnight when the sheriff's department executed seizure warrants based on evidence of fraud and money laundering. The construction business that my father thought he controlled also evaporated when my grandfather used his influence throughout the industry to ensure that every major contractor in the state knew about the financial crimes and breach of trust. Companies that had worked with our family for decades suddenly found reasons to terminate their relationships and seek new suppliers for their construction needs. The reputation my grandfather had spent 40 years building was being strategically deployed to destroy my father's ability to earn a living in the only industry he understood. My father's response to these financial attacks revealed just how desperate and dangerous he had become. Instead of accepting responsibility for his crimes or attempting to make restitution, he decided to escalate his abuse of me by arranging what he called a beneficial marriage with a man named Harold Brennan, a 62-year-old widower who owned several successful restaurants and had expressed interest in finding a young wife to help manage his business affairs. The marriage proposal was presented as a business transaction rather than a romantic relationship. Harold would pay off my father's gambling debts and provide financial security for our family, while I would become a dutiful wife who managed his household and helped him expand his restaurant empire. This is your chance to contribute something meaningful to this family instead of chasing impossible dreams about law school, my father declared when he announced the arrangement. Harold is a good man who can provide for you better than any career ever could. The meeting with Harold Brennan was one of the most humiliating experiences of my entire life. He spoke about me as if I were livestock being evaluated for purchase, commenting on my appearance and speculating about my potential as a mother and hostess for his business entertainment needs. When I tried to express my own opinions about the proposed arrangement, both men dismissed my concerns as irrelevant emotional outbursts that proved I wasn't mature enough to make my own decisions about my future. But something had changed in me during those weeks of systematic humiliation and abuse. The shy, compliant daughter who had always tried to please everyone was being replaced by someone harder and more determined. I began secretly applying for jobs in other towns, using the computers at the public library to submit applications and schedule interviews. I opened my own bank account using birthday money I had hidden in my room, and I started making plans for a life that didn't depend on my family's approval or financial support. The community was beginning to take notice of the dramatic changes in our family's circumstances, and the whisper campaigns were shifting from rumors about my character to questions about my father's sudden financial difficulties and increasingly erratic behavior. Former friends who had distanced themselves based on his lies were starting to wonder if they had been deceived about the true nature of our family dynamics. My mother's reaction to these developments revealed the depth of her complicity and moral bankruptcy. Instead of supporting me or questioning her husband's criminal behavior, she became even more desperate to preserve the status quo by pressuring me to accept Harold's proposal. "You're being selfish and stubborn," she accused when I refused to attend another meeting with my potential future husband. "This family is falling apart because of your pride and unrealistic expectations." A good daughter would sacrifice her own wants for the good of everyone else. But my grandfather was far from finished with his campaign of justice. The financial attacks were only the beginning of a comprehensive destruction that would leave my father with nothing but the consequences of his own choices and the bitter knowledge that he had destroyed his own family through greed and misogyny. Just when I felt most isolated and defeated, unexpected allies began emerging from places I had never anticipated. The first was Margaret Chen, my grandfather's longtime attorney, who appeared at the diner one afternoon during my shift and quietly asked if we could speak privately. She explained that she had been authorized by my grandfather to help me understand my legal rights and explore options for protecting myself from my father's increasingly abusive behavior. Margaret's office became a sanctuary where I could speak honestly about my situation without fear of judgment or betrayal. She explained that my father's position as my guardian would terminate when I turned 25 in a few months, and that the abuse I had suffered might constitute grounds for immediate emancipation if I chose to pursue legal action. More importantly, she helped me understand that my college fund had been protected by specific trust provisions that made my father's theft a serious federal crime with consequences that extended far beyond our family drama. She also revealed something that gave me hope for the first time in weeks. Harvard Law School had been contacted by my grandfather's office and informed about the circumstances surrounding my destroyed acceptance letter. The dean of admissions had agreed to extend my enrollment deadline while I gathered the necessary documentation to prove my identity and academic achievements. "Your grandfather has been working behind the scenes to ensure that your father's crimes don't destroy your educational opportunities," Margaret explained with a knowing smile. My second unexpected ally was our neighbor Sarah Rodriguez, a single mother who worked as a nurse at the local hospital and had been quietly observing our family's dynamics with growing concern. She approached me one evening as I walked home from another humiliating day at the diner and offered her phone number along with an invitation to call her anytime I needed help or simply someone to listen without judgment. Sarah's small apartment became my secret refuge when the atmosphere at home became too toxic to endure. She helped me create new email accounts that my father couldn't monitor, and she allowed me to use her address for mail related to my college applications and job searches. Most importantly, she provided the emotional support that helped me remember I was worthy of respect and kindness, even when my own family treated me like a burden and disappointment. But even as these allies were helping me rebuild my confidence and plan for independence, my mother was preparing the most devastating betrayal yet. During what I thought was a private conversation between just the two of us, she revealed the true depth of her resentment toward my academic achievements and future ambitions. "I never had the chances you've been given," she said with tears in her eyes, "and watching you succeed at everything I failed at has been torture for 24 years. She admitted that she had supported my father's decision to destroy my acceptance letter because she was jealous of the opportunities one had earned through hard work and dedication. "You think you're so much better than me because you got good grades and won scholarships," she continued, her voice becoming increasingly bitter and accusatory. "But you don't know what it's like to sacrifice everything for other people and get nothing in return except ungrateful children who think they're too good for the life you've built." The conversation revealed that my mother had been actively sabotaging my academic efforts for years in ways I had never suspected. She had convinced teachers that I was struggling emotionally and needed less pressure to succeed, which explained why some of my grades had been mysteriously lowered despite perfect test scores. She had also discouraged extended family members from offering me financial help with college expenses by telling them that I was spoiled and entitled and needed to learn the value of hard work through struggle and disappointment. Even worse, I discovered that my mother had been feeding information about my activities and plans to my father, including details about my secret job applications and my meetings with Margaret Chin. Every conversation I thought was private between mother and daughter had actually been intelligence gathering that was immediately reported back to the man who was systematically destroying my future prospects. My brother Michael's escalation from verbal abuse to physical threats marked another turning point in our family's descent into complete dysfunction. When he discovered that I had been using the public library computers to rebuild my college application materials, he followed me there and attempted to destroy my laptop bag while screaming accusations about my disloyalty to the family. The incident was witnessed by several librarians and patrons, marking the first time our private family drama had spilled over into public violence. The physical confrontation continued at home when Michael cornered me in my bedroom and threatened to beat some sense into me if I continued pursuing educational opportunities that he claimed were making the entire family look bad. His rage seemed disproportionate to anything I had actually done, but I later learned that my grandfather had cut off his allowance and repossessed his car as punishment for his role in stealing my college fund. The fourth major attack on my independence came when my father attempted to have me arrested on false charges of theft and fraud. He claimed that I had stolen money from the diner's cash register and forged checks from the family business accounts, accusations that were serious enough to warrant a police investigation even though they were completely fabricated. Only the intervention of the diner's other employees, who testified that I had always been honest and hardworking, prevented the charges from being filed formally. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was that my father had been contacting potential employers throughout the region, warning them that I was a thief and a liar who couldn't be trusted with money or confidential information. This explained why so many of my job applications had been ignored or rejected without explanation. My father's reputation in the business community was being used as a weapon to ensure that I could never achieve financial independence. The community was becoming increasingly divided as more details about our family situation became public knowledge. Some neighbors and family friends continued to support my father's traditional values and his right to make decisions about his daughter's future, while others were horrified by the growing evidence of abuse and financial crimes. The whisper campaigns were intensifying, but they were no longer focused solely on my alleged character flaws. My first major victory came when I successfully resubmitted my Harvard application with Dean Margaret's support and received confirmation that my enrollment would be processed despite the unusual circumstances. The acceptance letter that arrived in Sarah's mailbox felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person, proof that my dreams were still possible even though my family had tried to destroy them completely. But even this triumph was overshadowed by the growing realization that my father's desperation was making him increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. The man who had once been satisfied with controlling me through emotional manipulation and financial pressure was now willing to use criminal accusations and physical threats to maintain his authority. The battle for my independence was escalating into something much more serious than a simple family disagreement about gender roles and educational priorities. My father's response to losing control over the family finances and my growing independence was swift, vicious, and calculated to destroy not just my immediate prospects but my reputation in the community permanently. Within days of discovering that I had successfully resubmitted my Harvard application, he launched a comprehensive smear campaign designed to convince everyone in our small town that I was a dangerous sociopath who couldn't be trusted around decent people. The lies he spread were so elaborate and convincing that even people who had known me since childhood began to question everything they thought they understood about my character. He told our pastor that I had been stealing money from the church collection plate during services, providing fabricated evidence in the form of forged bank deposits that appeared to show unusual cash transactions in my secret bank account. He convinced several local business owners that I had been shoplifting from their stores by creating fake security footage that allegedly showed me concealing merchandise during routine shopping trips with my mother. But the most devastating accusation was his claim that I had been selling drugs to high school students using my academic reputation as cover for criminal activities. He produced doctored text messages that appeared to show me arranging drug deals, along with testimony from Michael's friends who were willing to lie in exchange for money and protection from their own legal troubles. The story was so detailed and seemingly well documented that even the police took it seriously enough to begin an informal investigation into my activities. My mother's participation in these false accusations was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire campaign. She provided sworn statements supporting my father's claims, describing incidents of suspicious behavior that she had supposedly witnessed but chosen to overlook out of maternal loyalty. Her tearful performance at the police station was so convincing that several officers expressed sympathy for her difficult situation as the mother of a child who had apparently gone astray despite their best efforts to provide proper guidance and moral instruction. Michael's role in the smear campaign escalated from providing false testimony to actual physical violence when he recruited several of his friends to help teach me what he called a lesson in respect and humility. The attack took place in the parking lot behind the diner after my evening shift, where 4 young men surrounded me and began pushing me around while shouting obscenities and threats about what would happen if I continued causing trouble for their friend's family. During the assault, my laptop was destroyed along with my cell phone and several personal items that contained important information about my college applications and job searches. They made sure to damage these items in ways that would be difficult to repair or replace, effectively cutting off my access to the digital resources I needed to pursue independence. The message was clear: any attempt to escape my father's control would be met with increasingly severe consequences. The fifth and most terrifying attack came when my father attempted to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility by claiming that I was suffering from delusions and posed a danger to myself and others. He had consulted with a corrupt psychiatrist who agreed to provide the necessary documentation in exchange for payment, creating a medical record that portrayed me as someone who had suffered a complete psychological breakdown due to academic pressure and unrealistic expectations about my future prospects. The commitment papers described elaborate fantasies about attending law school and pursuing a professional career, along with claims that I had become increasingly violent and unstable when confronted with the reality of my limited abilities and options. My father portrayed himself as a concerned parent who was seeking professional help for a daughter who had lost touch with reality and was making increasingly dangerous decisions that threatened the safety and well-being of the entire family. The near-defeat moment came when I realized how close I had come to being locked away in a mental institution where my father's lies would become my official medical history. Only Margaret Chen's emergency intervention, supported by documentation from Sarah Rodriguez about my mental stability and rational behavior, prevented the commitment order from being executed. But the experience left me shaken and terrified about what my father might attempt next in his desperate campaign to maintain control over my life. The community pressure intensified as more families began to distance themselves from anyone associated with our family drama. Parents who had once encouraged their children to follow my academic example now warned them to avoid me completely, afraid that association with someone facing such serious accusations might damage their own reputations and future prospects. Teachers and counselors who had supported my educational goals began treating me with suspicion and professional distance, unwilling to risk their careers by defending someone who might actually be guilty of the crimes being alleged. Even more devastating was the realization that some community members actually believed my father's version of events, viewing him as a traditional patriarch who was trying to protect his family from a dangerously rebellious daughter who had been corrupted by modern feminist ideologies. These supporters praised his efforts to restore proper order to his household and criticized those who questioned his methods or motives. My grandfather's temporary health scare added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. The stress of fighting his own son's criminality while trying to protect me from increasing abuse had triggered a minor heart attack that landed him in the hospital for several days. During his absence, my father became even more aggressive and unpredictable, sensing that his primary opponent was temporarily weakened and unable to provide immediate protection or intervention. The isolation was so complete that I began to wonder if my father's accusations might actually have some truth to them. When everyone around you treats you like a criminal and a liar, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain confidence in your own memory and judgment. I started questioning whether my academic achievements had been real or simply the result of grade inflation and low standards, whether my dreams of attending law school were realistic or just the fantasies of someone who had lost touch with her actual abilities and limitations. But even in my darkest moments, I held on to the knowledge that Margaret Chen and Sarah Rodriguez still believed in my character and potential. Their unwavering support reminded me that my father's lies were just that. Lies designed to destroy my confidence and convince me to accept a life of subservience and limitation. The battle for my future was far from over, but I was beginning to understand that victory would require me to fight with the same ruthless determination that my father was using against me. The turning point in our family's war came from an unexpected source. A professional forensic accountant hired by my grandfather's insurance company to investigate irregularities in the construction business's financial records. What began as a routine audit for policy renewal purposes quickly uncovered evidence of systematic fraud that was far more extensive and damaging than anyone had initially realized. The audit revealed that my father's criminal activities extended far beyond stealing from family trust accounts and gambling away my college fund. He had been systematically defrauding subcontractors by inflating material costs and pocketing the difference, creating fake employee records to claim unearned payroll tax deductions, and even billing clients for construction work that had never been completed. The total amount of his theft and fraud exceeded $700,000, making it a federal crime with mandatory minimum prison sentences that could keep him locked away for decades. When the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit became involved in the investigation, they discovered digital evidence that completely contradicted every lie my father had told about my character and behavior. Bank records showed that I had never made any unusual cash deposits or transactions, while security footage from multiple businesses proved that the allegations about shoplifting and drug dealing were completely fabricated. Even more damaging to my father's credibility was evidence showing that he had paid Michael's friends to provide false testimony and had attempted to bribe the corrupt psychiatrist who had agreed to support his commitment petition. The criminal charges were filed on a Wednesday morning that would forever change our family's dynamics and social standing in the community. Federal marshals arrived at our house with arrest warrants for both my father and my brother, along with seizure orders for every asset that had been purchased with stolen money. Watching them being handcuffed and read their rights in full view of our neighbors was both satisfying and heartbreaking. Satisfying because justice was finally being served, but heartbreaking because it represented the complete destruction of everything I had once believed about my family. The community's reaction to these developments was swift and dramatic. People who had been spreading rumors about my alleged criminal behavior suddenly found themselves apologizing and trying to distance themselves from the lies they had helped perpetuate. Local business owners who had banned me from their establishments based on my father's accusations began calling to offer me employment opportunities and express their regret for believing false information without conducting their own investigations. The pastor who had publicly denounced me from the pulpit issued a formal apology during Sunday service, acknowledging that he had failed to practice the Christian principles of charity and investigation before judgment that he regularly preached to his congregation. Teachers and counselors who had withdrawn their support began reaching out to offer letters of recommendation and assistance with my college applications, many of them expressing shame about how quickly they had abandoned someone they claimed to care about. But perhaps the most revealing reaction came from my mother, who chose to flee town rather than face the consequences of her participation in the fraud and abuse. Instead of apologizing for her role in destroying my opportunities and supporting my father's criminal behavior, she packed her belongings and left for her sister's house in another state, leaving behind a note that blamed me for destroying the family through my selfish ambitions and stubborn pride. The property seizures continued for several days as federal agents cataloged and removed everything that had been purchased with stolen funds. Cars, furniture, electronics, jewelry, artwork. Every symbol of our family's supposed prosperity was revealed to be the product of criminal activity rather than honest business success. The house itself was placed under federal lien pending the resolution of civil lawsuits aimed at recovering stolen assets for the victims of my father's crimes. My grandfather's health had stabilized enough for him to witness his son's arrest from his hospital bed, an experience that he later described as simultaneously heartbreaking and necessary. "I spent 40 years building a reputation for honesty and integrity in this community," he told me during one of my visits, "and watching my own son destroy that legacy through greed and cruelty has been the most painful experience of my entire life. But seeing him face justice for what he did to you gives me hope that some things in this world still matter more than money and power." Harvard Law School responded to the revelation of my circumstances by not only confirming my enrollment but also providing additional financial support to help me recover from the economic damage caused by my family's crimes. The Dean of Admissions called personally to express the university's commitment to ensuring that criminal behavior by family members would never prevent deserving students from pursuing their educational goals. The social ostracism that had made my life unbearable for months was suddenly reversed as community members competed to demonstrate their support for someone they now recognized as the victim rather than the perpetrator of family dysfunction. Job offers arrived daily from businesses eager to employ someone with my academic credentials and proven ability to persevere through adversity, while several local organizations invited me to speak about my experiences as an inspiration to other young people facing family opposition to their educational dreams. But even as public opinion shifted dramatically in my favor, I struggled with feelings of guilt and responsibility for my family's complete destruction. Despite everything my father and brother had done to me, they were still my family, and watching them face prison sentences and public humiliation was more difficult than I had anticipated. Margaret Chen helped me understand that feeling conflicted about their fate was a sign of emotional health rather than weakness, and that my compassion for people who had shown me none was actually evidence of the strong character they had tried so hard to destroy. The first major defeat of my father's authority came when the court ordered him to pay full restitution for my stolen college fund, along with punitive damages for the emotional distress and lost opportunities caused by his criminal behavior. The judgment was largely symbolic since he had no remaining assets to satisfy the debt, but it represented official recognition that his treatment of me had been both illegal and morally reprehensible. Sarah Rodriguez was officially recognized by the court as a crucial witness whose testimony had helped expose the truth about my character and circumstances. Her willingness to risk community disapproval by supporting someone who was being systematically slandered had made the difference between justice and continued abuse, demonstrating the power of individual courage in the face of collective prejudice and misinformation. The investigation also revealed how many other people in our community had been victims of my father's criminal activities, from employees who had been cheated out of proper wages to clients who had been overcharged for substandard construction work. The scope of his crimes created a network of victims who were eager to see him held accountable, ensuring that his prosecution would proceed regardless of any family members who might have been tempted to minimize his behavior or seek leniency on his behalf. The criminal trial that would seal my father and brother's fate began 6 months after their arrests, and the evidence presented during those proceedings revealed the full scope of their crimes in ways that shocked even those who thought they understood the situation. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case that included testimony from dozens of victims, hundreds of pages of financial documents, and digital evidence that proved the systematic nature of their fraud and deception. My father received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison followed by 5 years of supervised probation, along with an order to pay complete restitution to all victims of his crimes. The judge specifically noted the aggravating factor of his abuse toward me, stating that using his position as a parent to destroy his daughter's educational opportunities represented a particularly cruel form of domestic violence that warranted enhanced punishment under federal sentencing guidelines. Michael's sentence of 5 years in prison reflected his somewhat lesser role in the financial crimes, but the judge made it clear that his participation in the physical and emotional abuse had been considered as an aggravating factor. His friends who had participated in the assault were sentenced to shorter terms in state prison, while the corrupt psychiatrist lost his medical license and faced separate charges for his role in the attempted involuntary commitment. The civil lawsuits that followed the criminal convictions resulted in judgments that stripped away every remaining asset connected to my father's criminal enterprise. The construction company was dissolved and its assets distributed among the defrauded employees and clients, while my grandfather's insurance company recovered significant damages for the fraudulent claims that had been submitted over the years. The family home that had represented security and stability for my entire life was sold at auction to help pay the restitution judgments, with the proceeds distributed among the victims according to a court-supervised plan. Watching strangers walk through the rooms where I had grown up and experienced so much pain was emotionally difficult, but it also represented a final break from a past that had been built on lies and stolen money. My mother's attempt to escape accountability by fleeing to another state proved unsuccessful when she was tracked down by federal investigators and charged as an accessory to the fraud. Her trial revealed the full extent of her knowledge and participation in the crimes, including her role in forging documents and providing false testimony to support my father's accusations against me. She ultimately received a sentence of 3 years in federal prison, though she continued to maintain that she had been an innocent victim manipulated by her husband's lies. The business bankruptcy that followed my father's conviction left dozens of employees without jobs and several ongoing construction projects unfinished, creating a ripple effect of economic damage throughout our small community. Former business partners who had trusted my father with major contracts lost significant amounts of money, while suppliers who had extended credit based on his reputation were forced to write off substantial debts as uncollectible losses. The social ruin of our family name became complete when local newspapers published detailed accounts of the trial proceedings, including testimony about my father's treatment of me and his attempts to destroy my educational opportunities through fraud and manipulation. People who had once respected his opinion on community matters now viewed him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and traditional gender prejudices taken to criminal extremes. My father's health deteriorated rapidly during his first year in prison, as the stress of incarceration and the loss of his former status took a severe physical and mental toll. Reports from his cellmates suggested that he spent most of his time writing letters to anyone who might listen, trying to convince them that he had been wrongly convicted and that I was somehow responsible for the destruction of our family through my selfish ambitions and disrespectful behavior. The complete isolation my mother experienced after her conviction and imprisonment was perhaps the most fitting punishment for someone who had chosen to abandon her daughter rather than support her dreams. Her sister eventually stopped accepting her phone calls, and former friends deleted her contact information rather than risk association with someone whose name had become synonymous with betrayal and criminal complicity. Even as I watched my family face the consequences of their choices, I struggled with periods of guilt and regret about the role my educational aspirations had played in triggering these devastating events. Margaret Shin helped me understand that guilt was a normal response to trauma, but that accepting responsibility for other people's criminal choices would only perpetuate the cycle of abuse and manipulation that had defined our family dynamics for so many years. The second near-defeat moment came when I realized how completely my former life had been destroyed and how uncertain my future remained despite my legal victories. Starting over with nothing but my academic credentials and the support of a few loyal allies felt overwhelming, especially when I considered how many years it might take to build a new life that wasn't defined by my family's crimes and failures. But my grandfather's wisdom and financial support provided the foundation I needed to begin building something positive from the wreckage of our family's destruction. His decision to establish a new trust fund specifically for my education and early career expenses ensured that my father's crimes would not prevent me from pursuing my dreams, while his connections in the business community opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to someone with such a complicated family history. The community's recognition of my character and resilience gradually transformed from sympathy for a victim into respect for someone who had persevered through extraordinary circumstances while maintaining her moral integrity. Invitations to speak at local schools and community organizations about overcoming family opposition to education became opportunities to help other young people recognize and resist similar patterns of control and manipulation in their own lives. The final legal victory came when the court ordered my father to publicly apologize for his false accusations against me and to retract every lie he had told about my character and behavior. The written statement, which was published in the local newspaper and read aloud during a community meeting, represented official vindication of everything I had endured and survived during the darkest period of my life. 2 years after walking across the graduation stage at Harvard Law School with my grandfather proudly watching from the audience, I can finally say that the journey from victim to survivor to advocate has taught me lessons about resilience, justice, and forgiveness that no classroom could have provided. The young woman who once stood in her family's kitchen watching her dreams being literally torn apart has become someone who helps other people fight for their right to pursue education and independence despite family opposition and financial abuse. My healing journey began with extensive therapy to process the complex trauma of systematic emotional abuse and family betrayal. Learning to trust my own judgment again after years of being told I was delusional and ungrateful required patient work with a counselor who specialized in family abuse dynamics. The most difficult aspect of recovery was accepting that some relationships are too toxic to salvage, and that choosing to protect yourself from further harm isn't selfish or cruel, it's necessary for survival and growth. My career at a law firm specializing in educational rights and family law has allowed me to transform my personal experience into professional advocacy for others facing similar circumstances. Every client who walks into my office carrying the weight of family opposition to their dreams reminds me why I fought so hard to escape my own situation and why that fight was worth every moment of pain and uncertainty. The educational equality cases I've handled have ranged from young women whose families have refused to support their college aspirations to adult learners whose spouses have sabotaged their attempts to return to school for professional development. Each victory in court represents not just legal precedent but proof that the justice system can protect people's right to pursue their potential regardless of family prejudices or financial manipulation. My grandfather's wisdom during my darkest moments proved to be the foundation for everything I've accomplished since then. His lesson that justice isn't about revenge, it's about preventing the same harm from happening to other innocent people, helped me understand that my family's destruction wasn't something to celebrate, but rather a necessary consequence of choices they had made repeatedly over many years. The new relationships I've built with colleagues, friends, and mentors have shown me what healthy family dynamics actually look like. Watching people support each other's dreams and celebrate each other's achievements without jealousy or competition has been a revelation after growing up in an environment where success was viewed as a zero-sum game and gender determined your worth and potential. The trust fund my grandfather established for my education has grown into a scholarship program that helps other young people escape family situations where education is viewed as unnecessary or inappropriate for their gender, race, or social class. Being able to provide financial support for students facing similar circumstances has transformed my personal trauma into something that can create positive change for future generations. My mother's eventual attempts to reconnect after her release from prison have forced me to grapple with questions about forgiveness and the possibility of rebuilding damaged relationships. While I've chosen to maintain limited contact through letters, I've also learned that forgiveness doesn't require exposing yourself to further harm or pretending that serious damage didn't occur. The community where I grew up has become a place I visit occasionally but no longer call home, as too many memories and associations make it difficult to maintain the peace and stability I've worked so hard to achieve. Building a new life in a different city has allowed me to define myself by my accomplishments and character rather than by my family's crimes and failures. My father's recent letter from prison, attempting to apologize and rebuild our relationship, sits unanswered in my desk drawer as a reminder that some bridges are burned beyond repair. While I don't wish him continued suffering, I also recognize that my obligation is to protect my own mental health and continue building a life that honors the dreams he tried to destroy. The young women who contact me through social media and professional networks, seeking advice about overcoming family opposition to their educational goals, represent the most meaningful aspect of my career. Being able to provide practical guidance and emotional support to someone standing where I once stood gives purpose to everything I endured and survived. My grandfather's declining health has made our remaining time together precious and urgent, as I work to absorb his final lessons about building something positive from life's most difficult experiences. His pride in watching me graduate from law school and establish my own practice has provided healing for wounds that were deeper than either of us initially realized. The question that guides my work in my life now is simple but powerful. How can I use my education, resources, and experience to ensure that other young people don't have to choose between family loyalty and personal dreams? The answer has led me to advocacy, mentoring, and legal work that challenges the systems and attitudes that treat education as a privilege rather than a fundamental right. Looking back, I can see that my father's attempt to destroy my Harvard acceptance letter was actually the catalyst for a transformation that made me stronger, more determined, and more compassionate than I ever could have become without that struggle. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's cruelty, even when that person is family. The lesson I carry forward from those dark months of systematic abuse and manipulation is that your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or approval, and your dreams don't become less valid because someone else finds them threatening or inappropriate. The young woman who stood in that kitchen holding pieces of torn paper had no idea she was actually holding the keys to a future that would be built on her own terms, supported by people who recognized her value and potential. As I finish telling you this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever faced opposition from family or friends when pursuing your dreams? Have you found yourself in a situation where the people who claim to love you are actually trying to limit your potential? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find the courage to keep fighting for their own future. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience, justice, and the power of refusing to accept other people's limitations on your life. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their dreams are valid and worth fighting for, regardless of who tries to convince them otherwise. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your education, your ambitions, and your right to determine your own future are never negotiable, no matter what anyone else might try to tell you. The person who believes in your potential might be closer than you think. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to step forward and help you fight for the life you deserve.